Hey everybody, it's Meredith Miller with Inner Integration, and today I want to bring you a message about what to do when the shit hits the fan. So I actually had a different video planned to do this week, and then the earthquake happened here a couple nights ago. So I thought, okay, go with the flow. I have a different message to share right now. And by the way, thank you so much to all of you who sent me messages and comments and asked if I was all right. I'm perfectly fine. Venus is fine. Hi, Venus. Say hi, Venus. We're fine. We just got really scared. That's all. It was the craziest earthquake I'd ever experienced, even in California. I'd never experienced anything like that. And Mexico City, where we're at, is actually quite far, several hundred miles from the epicenter. It was really bad in the south, and those happened to be like the poorest areas of the country. So of course, like the architecture, the way the houses are built, it's not nearly as good. These buildings here, these new buildings are really strong. I was quite impressed, I was moving back and forth a lot. But it was just scary, that's all. And we're fine, so thank you. But that brought up this topic that I wanted to talk about. And that's like, what do you do when the shit hits the fan? Like something completely out of your control, like a fucking earthquake comes. Or, maybe some people who are hunkering down now for these hurricanes that are coming through the Atlantic and the Caribbean. Like, what do you do? Like, if you're there and you haven't gotten out, or you're in some kind of other crazy situation where you don't have an option, you just have to get through, what do you do? So for me, the most important thing is to get control of my mind immediately get control of my mind. And so I teach this thing that I learned from theta healing several years ago, and I apply it to recovering from narcissistic abuse. I made like a $5 exercise that teaches how to do it with 3 different kinds of negative flashbacks or negative self-talk, and how do you reprogram that, right? And so like when you're in a chaotic, crazy situation, that's the first thing that's going to happen is like all these negative thoughts, fearful thoughts, panic thoughts are going to come through your mind. That's where you've got to grab the reins and get yourself into a healthy mental state. And so what I found was like it was almost midnight that night when the earthquake started to happen, and the seismic siren went off, and I didn't know what it was at first. It's like 30 seconds it took me to figure out what was happening. And by the time like I got out of bed, like you could barely stand up. And Venus was freaking out. So I just sat on the floor next to the bed with her, and she was like glue on my side, and she was trembling, and we just sat there. And it was a long time. Like it was multiple minutes. Like it seemed by the time I sent text messages to people, it was like 5 minutes long, from when it just started slowly to when it was most intense to when it like slowly backed off. So in that moment, I was huddled there with her, and I just went into this mental space where I went the second night that I drank ayahuasca and had a really crazy experience. And I just kept telling myself, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. This is going to pass. This is going to stop. Eventually it's going to stop. Everything's going to be okay. And that's all. My mind was just going on this program because I have consciously programmed my mind to do that. Right. So at first, like when you get out of the abusive situation, what happens is you are living in a negativity paradigm. Like whether you went through a several month relationship, whether that was intimate or, work situation with a boss or coworker or some other traumatic situation that came into your life, or whether it was many years, or whether you grew up with it since childhood. And especially if you grew up with it since childhood, you were programmed into this negative mental paradigm. So how do you override that? You want to start by teaching yourself consciously to do that. Like every time those negative thoughts come up, every time that fear thought come up, immediately you want to cancel that stuff and start reprogramming with something positive. And so at first, when you start to do this, what's going to happen is you're going to notice like just how many negative thoughts there are. Like it's all the time at first, and it's really hard, but you got to be like a ninja at those thoughts. Like this reprogramming, the self-talk, is one of the most important parts of the self-healing process after narcissistic abuse. It takes place in stage 2. Right, in stage 2 of the recovery journey. That's when you really want to get in there and reprogram your thoughts to positive thoughts. Like you got to get control of your mind if you want to get out of that negative sphere, that negative paradigm, because that's then what creates your whole reality. So catch those thoughts, delete them, reprogram them with something positive. Again, that's going to be like so much work at first because there's so many negative thoughts, but little by little, it starts to become more and more automatic until eventually it's just an automatic subconscious thing. Like you have trained your mind to go there. after all these years now, I have trained my mind to go there, like to immediately go to like the positive stuff that talks me through it. So, it came up the other night during the earthquake. This has also come up in the past, many years ago, being in an abusive situation with someone. They pick the fights like late at night and they really try to disturb you late at night. Or maybe worst case scenario, like you're like in a situation with a psychopath and like you called him or her out and like you literally felt like they were going to kill you, and yet you're still sleeping in the same bed as this person, and so it happened where like I rolled over on my side with my back to this person, and just to talk myself to sleep I would just go over and over and over this programming. I also use it when I get like a weird pain in my body. Like before I even look at it or investigate it, I get my mind right, because that's what shifts my reality. Like I know that sounds so woo-woo, but this has really served me really, really valuably throughout the last several years. Like as soon as I get a pain in my body, everything is okay. My body is healthy. My body is strong. My body is resilient. I know how to heal myself. And I just go to this space. And so like I said, eventually this just becomes automatic. It becomes subconscious. At first, it's going to be quite a lot of work to get yourself into this positive space. So what else do I want to say? Oh yeah, so the difference between like the human and the animal, right? So during the earthquake, how we deal with trauma and this stuff, like it's the conscious mind. That's the difference. Like the animals have the unconscious mind, the subconscious mind. They go on this sort of automatic, instinctual thing. And we humans, we have this conscious mind, which is both, our greatest gift and also our biggest obstacle. Because if we let it go amok, if we don't program it in a way that serves us positively. So, we get through the scary moments and Venus is like trembling and really, really scared. And even a few moments after the trembling stopped, she was still shaking. She didn't want to leave my side. Like 10 minutes later, she started walking around and investigating things. Within 45 minutes, she was back to snoring. I mean, snoring, like nothing happened. It took me a good 3 hours to calm down the adrenaline, to stop the fears of every siren that I heard, that something was going to happen again, or that, the next aftershock was going to come or something. Like it took me more than 3 hours to calm that enough to talk myself to sleep. The next morning I woke up, and of course it was the first thing on my mind, But for Venus, it was like nothing ever happened. Like it was like any normal morning. All she wanted to do was have breakfast to go for a walk, and come over and get some love. And it was literally like she just deleted that from her mind. It was gone. The trauma was gone. So animals process trauma in a very different way than humans. And part of it, I think, is because they don't have the conscious mind. And another part of it, I think, is the way that they shake things off. Like after something freaks her out or she gets anxious or she doesn't like something, her whole body just shakes it off. And then she's okay. And if you watch like nature channels, what you see is like, maybe a gazelle gets chased by a lion and maybe that day the gazelle gets away. And the gazelle isn't then like, paralyzed or trembling or like terrified to go on living. The gazelle shakes it off and goes back to grazing, and go back to life because that trauma just got deleted. So, it's so interesting to see the difference between the way animals and humans process that. And another thing that can help you is to do this shaking. It's also called shimmering in Qigong. Qigong is like a Chinese martial art, but it's not really for fighting. It's more for healing. It's energy work. And that's sort of where you just stand there and very slowly from your ankles, starting with your ankles and your feet, and just start to vibrate and just start to allow your whole body to vibrate. And then eventually like it works up, toward like from your feet and your heels up towards your head. And when you're with your neck, be gentle with your neck. You don't want to hurt yourself, but just stand there and just let everything shake and vibrate. So anytime you go through something scary, you go through some kind of scary experience, even a really challenging conversation with someone who's manipulative and abusive, go get yourself to another room where nobody can see you've got your privacy and just shake that stuff out of your body. It's like literally like shaking all of your cells so the trauma can leave your body so that we don't get stuck with it as much. Because as humans, our conscious mind can freeze that stuff in the brain and then it becomes PTSD. And I'm not saying, you're going to totally avoid the PTSD. Those of us who have gone through these abusive relationships came out with PTSD or complex PTSD. That's quite normal. But to help you get through those moments when the shit hits the fan, use this technique. Try the shimmering, see if that works for you, and absolutely use the reprogramming of the negative dialogue going through your mind, and start practicing it now on the daily, just to override the negative paradigm. And then when you get into a moment of like, oh shit, like totally out of your control, like a natural disaster, or you come across a new abusive situation or something like that happens, that way you've already trained your mind to go there. You've trained yourself to get into that mental space. It's going to make all the difference. So I'm sending you all a big hug.